Every now and again, I will come across a comment that I find really interesting and makes me want to do a video about, and today's video is actually one example of this. So a few months ago, I had a comment from Hermit the Cog, and I do have permission to use their name in this video, and it's all about autism and advocacy. We're absolutely not being properly represented by disability organisations, which suffer the same hierarchical obstacles and bureaucratic ineptitude as every other contemporary business, i.e. they exist to sustain themselves first and support others seconds, and usually quite a distant second at that. Organisational apathy, indifference and blatant ignorance is commonplace, and compounds rather than supports our challenges. Not to mention that unless we're independently wealthy, we lack access to affordable and effective legal resources, which only ensures that the status quo remains unchanged at our expense. So I thought this comment was really interesting because I'm a late diagnosed autistic person. I was diagnosed earlier this year, I think it was February, at the age of 49, and I was just astonished to see the lack of supports and lack of services out there for autistic adults. And it feels like once you've got this diagnosis, which is a massive thing to be told about yourself, there's kind of nowhere to go in many ways to try and seek support in order for you to kind of deal with this kind of huge diagnosis. And I have to say, I've been somewhat disappointed by autism charities and what they have to offer, or more to the point, what they don't have to offer for autistic adults. However, because I've worked for a number of charities in my life, I do have to stick up for them a little bit here because I know the difficulties that they have with funding, and often they're just not able to put on all of the project work that they want to. So I can absolutely understand some of the difficulties that they have, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that they're not doing nearly enough. So the purpose of this video is not to hate on autism charities, although maybe Autism Speaks, because I know how difficult it is for charities to operate and do all the things that they want to do. I've worked in various charities in my life, and there's all sorts of struggles that they face that, unless you're directly involved with charities or work for charities, you're probably not going to be aware of really. So when we think about all the charities out there, very few of them are in a situation where they're financially robust, and they always have to think about funding and where their next funding pot's coming from. So they'll invariably have different kind of funding streams as well, depending on the work that the charity's doing. Some of them may well get government grants, or they'll get money from other grants providers. Almost all charities will rely on public donations in some kind of way, and some of them will offer kind of like a membership as well. So looking for funding and applying for funding is a massive undertaking for all charities. Applying for funding as a charity is really competitive as well. It has many parallels with an individual applying for a job. You've got all sorts of other candidates up for this job, and you all want the same position. So many charities will be vying for that funding as well. And when charities apply for any funding from a grant provider, the money that they hope to get has to be ring-fenced around a certain kind of project really. So it has to meet a certain set of criteria. So they can't just kind of move that money to another project. It has to be for that agreed piece of work really. So in many ways, this is quite limiting for a charity, because they can't just suddenly think, you know what, I'd love to do this new piece of work, because the money has to come from somewhere in order for them to do that specific project work. And like any other kind of business out there, the bulk of the money has to go on running costs for the charity, as well as salaries. You know, that's really quite usual for any charity out there. for the bulk of their money to go to these kind of two areas really. And also it's really hard to get kind of continuing funding. So a charity might come up with an amazing idea one year, but they don't have the kind of following funds in order to prolong the life of whatever project work that they want to do. So it's a really hard balance for charities, and you know, I do get that. However, regardless of funding, when a charitable organisation isn't doing anywhere near enough for one of their core demographics, then there clearly is a problem. So today I thought it might be really interesting to take a look at a autism charity's website to see what they're doing for autistic adults. And today I'm going to look at the National Autistic Society, which is the main autism charity here in the UK. So come and join me over at my computer. Okay, so I'm at my computer now, and apologies for any difference in audio, as I'm sure there will be. My camera's at a different position entirely, but I think the first thing that I'm interested in doing is to check out who we are so we can find out who the CEO is. Now then, I'm not going to show names and faces for obvious reasons really. I'm here to critique the charity and website as a whole and not individuals, but from my understanding, there are 7 directors, including the CEO, who aren't autistic. There's 1 patron and 1 president who aren't autistic. There are 12 vice presidents, 2 of which are autistic, and 13 trustees who aren't autistic. So from my calculation, out of 34 people, just 2 are autistic, meaning that 6% out of the whole leadership board and people that make decisions for the charity are autistic. I do need to say, however, that there may well be some autistic people within this group that have chosen not to disclose that they're autistic, but I don't know, I don't know how I feel about that, considering they're representing a National Autistic Society. I would expect them to disclose that information really. And also I do need to point out that I am mildly dyslexic, so there may well be 1 or 2 that I've missed. I don't think so, but I just need to put that in just in case. I have to say I'm just really alarmed by the lack of representation of autistic adults. For an organisation that is supposed to be representing us and providing some kind of advocacy, this just isn't good enough. The trustees are essentially the decision makers in any charity, and if you've not got any representation from one of your core demographics, what is that all about? So anyway, let's pretend that we're a person who's interested in finding out what autism is. Perhaps I think I could be autistic, and I'm looking for information as to what to do with that information. Where do I go? And yeah, help and support. What's here? Okay, so we're in advice and guidance now. So where is the information that I need to establish whether I could be autistic or not? There's just not anything here, is there? Nothing that I can see anyway. And it seems to be just quite an odd list of things really. I'm just going to click on transitions here to find out what this is about really. So making transition decisions. Okay. A guide for young people and a guide for parents on the difficulties of transitions. Okay, so where is the guide for autistic adults? I don't know, that's just really confusing. So anyway, let's go back to this list. So what is autism? Let's check that out. Okay, let's read more on this. So there's quite a nice little film here that you can watch, but what I'm missing is like a checklist really. You know, not everybody wants to watch a little film on autism, regardless of how pretty it is. It's just lacking for me. Okay, so if we scroll down here, think you or someone you know could be autistic before diagnosis. Okay, so finally I found deciding on whether to seek an autism diagnosis. So there is some information here, but why is it so difficult to find? I spent over an hour on this website yesterday in preparation for this video, and I could not find this information. So this is an absolute fluke that I found it now. Okay, so let's go into what we do, and it's diagnostic services. So, okay, so this looks like the Lorna Wing Centre for Autism is affiliated somehow to the National Autistic Society, but I get that they want to promote and advertise their own services, but for me, what is missing here is any real information about other ways to seek a diagnosis. It's almost kind of hidden away, so it's just not user friendly at all. There should be more information on this page about other NHS pathways, including right to choose, because in the interests of fairness, people should be given all the information available so that they can make their own decision. Editing Lizzie here. I think there is some other information elsewhere on the website that's pertinent to this, but given that this is on their main diagnostic services page, there should be more information here about NHS routes. So we look at what we do again. Where is a section on I'm a late diagnosed autistic person or a late self-realised autistic person? What do I do? It's just really lacking in that area for me. Okay, so they've got some training available for workplaces, which is undoubtedly useful. And there is one module here on finding employment via an e-learning module if you're an autistic adult. And I signed up for this module, and although I think it's a really great idea, it is the most cumbersome thing to actually use, and I don't know how useful it actually is. In fact, I tried to complete this e-module learning course so I could give you some feedback on it, but I just couldn't complete it because I got stuck on one page, and for whatever reason it just would not allow me to move on. So it's clearly not working, or if it is working, it's really hard to fathom how to use it. And also, what frustrates me about this employment section for autistic people is that the person is forced into doing this e-learning module when sometimes we just want easily accessible information. Like, for instance, if I wanted to go to my employer to ask for reasonable adjustments, why can't I just print that off? Is it just me? Why is this so difficult? Why do I have to sign up to a course to get this information? I just want to be able to access that information without, having to jump through hoops, really. So let's now look at Autism Services directory, because autistic adults want services, don't they? And okay, so there's UK-wide or local organisations that are specifically for or have adapted their services to meet the needs of autistic people and their families. Okay, so let's say I want to find something around Crewe. Editing Lizzie here. I'm not using keywords here because I may not know which ones to use, and I just want to see which services are available within a specific area. And any decent search software should allow for this, in my opinion. Right, so what's come up here? North Ayrshire. Well, I can tell you now that Ayrshire in Scotland is not near Crewe. Ayrshire and Arran again. So the Highlands, this is clearly not working. So I don't know what that's about. Let's expand this to 50 miles. Okay, so the same information again, so this isn't working. Okay, so what does this say? Inclusion in the directory does not imply endorsement of a service by the National Autistic Society. Okay, so what are these services then? That is kind of meaningless in many ways, really. So then they're in no way affiliated to National Autistic Society, but they're listing their services anyway. Not sure how I feel about that. So I did some searches for other places, but needless to say, they didn't come up either. It seems to want you to put in a keyword, but if you're just looking for autism services, why do you need to put in a keyword? It just doesn't seem very user-friendly to me. Okay, so I'll go back to the main page, and what should we look at now? Maybe some campaign work, that's always really important. Public understanding is something that really needs looking at, in my opinion, and here they've got just 2 campaigns. So there's Now I Know. So Now I Know is a campaign that raises awareness of autistic women and non-binary people, but while it's great, you know, this kind of stuff is so important. I don't remember seeing this anywhere, to be honest, in UK media. So for me, in terms of campaigns and campaign materials, I think they work best when they're kind of easily shareable on social media and when they've been designed specifically for social media. You know, stuff like challenging myths or FAQs work really well for that kind of media, really. So it would be really nice to see just some materials like that on their website. I don't know, it's an interesting one. I do like this, you know, share your story on social media using Now I Know, but for me, I don't know, I'd just like to see some visuals that people can easily use on their own social media. And what was the other thing? The Chelsea Flower Show, which is, you know, it's all great awareness, but for me, campaign like that is just so easily lost, isn't it, in terms of a national kind of awareness, really. I just think that the National Autistic Society and other autism charities actually need to be focusing far more on campaign materials, because I think it almost needs like a kind of focus group which comprises autistic people and particularly autistic adults to both come up with and design a series of campaign materials or visuals that are easily understood, easily shareable, so that they can show them to family members or friends to help them better understand what autism is. I don't know about you, but I think they can be doing way better with their website because it's really cumbersome. You can't find the information that you're looking for. You have to kind of go through different weird pathways, almost like a maze, to try and find anything that's kind of relevant to what you're searching for. And it's almost like the website has been created without any thought whatsoever given to who's going to be looking at it, i.e., autistic people. You know, some of us have dyslexia, some of us have learning disabilities, and some of us have chronic illnesses where we're dealing with brain fog all the time. So we have to have information that's really easy to understand and accessible. I'm very aware that you could argue that you can just use the search facility on a website, but if you're not wholly sure of what you're looking for, or if you don't have the right keywords, you could be missing out on a whole bunch of pertinent information. And it's just far more user friendly for this all to be found really easily. So if I were to redesign the website, I would say that you would need probably 4 main sections on the homepage, and they're all clearly marked. And the first would be all about autism, and it would include like a checklist, etc., for those that are wondering whether or not that they could be autistic. And within that also would be campaign materials that are easily shareable on social media, etc., because I think this is desperately lacking. The second section would be for autistic adults, including those that have been recently diagnosed and they haven't a clue as to what to do next. Where do they find any information? It's really important that that information is presented to them easily on this website. And the third section would be for autistic children and for parents and carers of autistic children, and have all the relevant information about that within that particular section. And the fourth section would be for employers, so all the relevant information would be within that section, but there should also be print-offs for autistic people to be able to print off, and it should be easily accessible stuff. They shouldn't have to be forced into doing kind of e-learning modules because it's just not appropriate for everybody. Please bear in mind that I am in no way a website designer, and I'm sure there are way better suggestions out there, but I think we can all agree that this website could be doing way better in terms of usability. So there's my critique of the charity website, but of course, a website is just one facet of a charity's work. So I don't doubt there's absolutely loads that goes on behind the scenes, but what I would really like to see is kind of more transparency around what they're doing in terms of advocacy for autistic adults. I just feel like they need to be way more vocal about what it is that they're doing. And I'm sure that there is some good work going on. I've worked in charities. I appreciate that we don't get to see everything that goes on, but I think they need to communicate better as to what they're doing. We recently had a new government installed, and I've no doubt that the Autistic Society are lobbying the new government, as they rightly should be doing. But what is the message behind that lobbying? I would love to know. What I would really like to see is some kind of direct online supports for autistic adults. And I appreciate that this is a massive ask because it's a whole lot of work, and I fully appreciate that, but I'd like to see something like Zoom calls where they could invite a whole host of autistic adults to take part in online discussions. And this is something that other organisations do. For instance, I am on the YouTube Shorts partnership programme on my other art channel, and they have like weekly dial-ins where you can kind of join the conversation. It tends to be a representative from YouTube just explaining kind of what's going on and trying essentially to get everybody involved with creating shorts, etc. And I can absolutely see how this could be rolled out through the Autistic Society, and maybe it's a case of having a new cohort of autistic adults join the programme every 3 months or so, and they just go through a series of almost like webinars really, each with a themed discussion, so that they feel involved in the community and are able to find out more about being autistic. And I should point out actually that the National Autistic Society does have focus groups, and autistic adults are actually invited to join one of those focus groups. I think there's 3 separate ones. And for me, although it's a really great idea and it's something that I ordinarily would be interested in joining, because there's seemingly so few autistic people involved in the makeup of the charity, I just feel like, what's the point? I would much rather be involved with something that's created for autistic people by autistic people, and it's clearly not happening in this case. So to summarise, I know that I've talked a lot about one particular UK charity today, but I think a lot of what I've said can actually apply to a whole array of different autism charities and advocacy groups out there. So I think the message is pretty similar for all. I think it's just really clear that advocacy groups need to be providing accessible and easy to understand resources for autistic people. And we know that there's a real lack of support and support services out there. And now is the time to start thinking in new and innovative ways to better support autistic people because we really need it. So Hermit's comments was in two parts. So the second part says, personally, I think we have all the markings of a distinct culture and ought to be pushing for autonomy and self-determination as a distinct group. But it seems we're still too accommodating of the neurotypical majority to demand it for ourselves. And I'd be inclined to agree with that comment because, well, we see it in action, don't we, in autism charities. Their leadership boards are very often made up of a majority of holistic or neurotypical people, and there just isn't enough representation from autistic people. And I think this has to change. Who better to advocate for autistic people than autistic people? And this is in no way a slight on parents of autistic children who have done phenomenal work in raising awareness and understanding about autism, but we need involvement from autistic people as well. I think there's just so much to say around the autistic community being its own distinct culture that I'll probably discuss this in a future video because, I don't want this one to go on forever. So I'd really like to thank Hermit for their comments because it just captured my interest really, and I think it's made for an interesting topic and an interesting video, and it only evidences actually how important your comments are when you leave them on my channel and other creator channels, because I think sometimes we don't realise how we can influence future content really. So it's just a really good thing to be aware of. And while we're talking about comments, because this is a video about autism and advocacy, I'd really like to go through your comments on this video in a future video so we can hear others' thoughts and experiences and perspectives on what's happening with advocacy within the autism community, because it's really important to hear a diverse mix of views really, all from autistic people. I'd also love to hear what you think autism charities and other advocacy groups should be doing to make life easier for autistic people. And incidentally, just as a personal safety thing, if you don't want me to mention your handle name or your username, just let me know in your comments. So I really look forward to seeing those. So I think that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.